I'm Steve Evans, obviously I've been introduced, and basically I present a program called Business Daily, which goes out every day on a thing we've got called the World Service to about 30 million people. And I have to tell you that addressing a live audience is much more daunting than any of that stuff, because you're real people and you've got real thoughts and you laugh or you don't laugh. Anyway, the program that I do broadcasts to ordinary, intelligent lay people. We are a jargon-free zone. We love business, but we talk about it like ordinary people do. We love technology, but we talk about it like ordinary people do. We want to know how technology affects us, ordinary people. And I'm going to bring that rule about it being jargon-free to this session here. Not that I think it, I suspect it needs it. This thing's called a hotspot because I think it's because it's where the hot thought is. It's where you feel things getting a bit hotter before breakthroughs. So it ought to be really interesting. We've got 4 absolutely fascinating people. I think there's a theme to them, and that is how you make money out of great ideas. No shortage of great ideas, but how you have business models that turn those ideas into money is another matter. On my immediate left, Tom Rabon, who's the Executive Vice President of Red Hat, one of the pioneers of the open source movement. I said earlier that he's a proselytizer, a disciple of open source, and he smiled, but he didn't contradict me, so we'll see all about that. David Weiner is the editor of Scripting News, developer of RSS, software central to podcasts. We all know that. Big question about where's the way of making money out of that. Mark Bernstein, President and Center Director of the Palo, Alto Research Center, one of the great iconic centers of thought on this planet. And then Larry Smarr, the Director of the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology, better known as Cal IT2. So let me give you the floor first of all, Tom. Tell me about what you do and why it's important to us and where it's going.
Well, Red Hat is basically our company brings open source solutions to the enterprise space. Our customers are among the largest companies and enterprises in the world. And basically what we've done is built a company and a business model around open source software, where we've basically taken consulting and training, added it along with the ability to set up our own development platform called Fedora, where we take software which is contributed by people all over the world. It could be a college professor in Japan, it could be an engineer with NASA, it could be a college student at UC San Diego who have the ability to contribute to our development platform. We take that code, we test it, we certify it, we make sure it will work with other software, and then we package it as a subscription and sell it to our customers, and in return they get constant updates and access to the newest and best technology out there.
So the way you make money is charging money for the service?
For the service, exactly. The software is basically free. We just build a business around it. And we fundamentally believe that the development model for open source software is much better than the proprietary model, in that it would be like
Bill Gates agrees?
He may not agree, but interestingly enough, within the last year, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about the Gates Foundation and the good work they're doing in trying to find a cure for AIDS. And one of the requirements for receiving the funding from the Gates Foundation as a cure for AIDS is making sure you share that information. So the thing that's so exciting about the open source movement and about the small role that our business plays in it is it's really all about collaboration. There's a wonderful book which I read recently that it's entitled Mavericks at the Gate. And there's a wonderful quote in that book, and it says, "Nobody is smarter than everybody." And, I thought about that in the context of the meeting here at FiRe and that Mark puts on. And when I immediately opened the booklet that came with it, Mark's talking about community and how important that is. We just fundamentally believe that the power of the community is greater than the power of the individual.
Nobody can doubt the good words like community and together, but the snag, and the wisdom of crowds, the great buzz phrase of our time, but the snag with community is that everybody thinks that somebody else will pick up the bill, what economists call a public cost. How do you get around that thing? Everybody likes community. Who doesn't like community?
You know, it's very interesting in the software world. I work with people, some of the brightest minds in the software world every single day that are real technologists, which I really am not. And they basically have a sort of a technology meritocracy where the best ideas bubble up to the top. So in their minds, there is no greater tribute that one could be paid than to be recognized by their peers. And in the context of software, what that means is getting, you know, some of their code put into the overall code itself.
There is a greater tribute that can be paid, and it's a tribute in money. People want pay not to be stroked. They like both, but they're in it for the money.
Hey, well, you know, interestingly enough, there are people out there, and there are lots of them, that everyone's got to pay the light bill, you understand, and the rent and all those fun things. But there are people out there who are motivated by, they attach a greater degree of importance to being recognized as being a leader among their peers and doing something that helps mankind as opposed to making lots of money.
I'm going to change the format of this a bit because I can see you nodding so furiously.
No, I was shaking my head. I find that disturbing.
Rolling your eyes?
I find that disturbing because my background is as a programmer and from originally, well, at one point from Silicon Valley, and I was there during the height of the .com boom, and everybody was going crazy about open source. And that's what they were saying. They were saying, oh, well, isn't it great? You can get all the programmers you want, and they'll work for free. And meanwhile, the venture capitalists and the marketing guys were making millions and millions of dollars. And I was thinking, well, what's wrong with this picture? And as a result, we sort of are thin on technology as a result of that, I think. And so you have to strike the right balance. I think that open source certainly has a place, and there is money. I think the way to answer that question that you asked is that there's money to be made, but it doesn't have to be made directly off of the act of coding. But that money should be shared with the people who create the technology. So why, certainly it's nice to get recognition from your peers, but I agree with you that it's also nice to take home a nice paycheck. Too,
I love being stroked, but I'll tell you, I need to pay the bills.
And getting a big paycheck is a nice way to get stroked too, right?
But let's move on to you. I mean, your technology is crucial to podcasting, and the issue of how you make money out of that, how you pay the people who come up with the ideas, is a dilemma we're still having.
No, I don't see it as a dilemma. I mean, it sort of betrays a point of view. I think that a person who comes from professional media would ask that question, would want to know, how would somebody who's doing something that's very much like what I do get paid for doing this? Well, there may not be a way to get paid for doing podcasts, but that doesn't mean people won't do it. There's no way to get paid for using the telephone either, right, directly, but people still use the telephone. A friend of mine, Doc Searles, likes to say there's no business model for a front porch, but I still like to have a front porch and entertain my friends. That was sort of the answer for how do you make money off of a blog. These are ways to communicate, and it's much like the open source situation, is that the money may not come directly from the act of creating the podcast. I'll give you an example. I started scripting news in 1997. Since then, that's the only way I've communicated about any of the work that I've done. So I've not run any ads. I used to spend a lot of money on advertising. I have not paid for any ads. And I've managed to make a fair amount of money, off my software. So have I made money off my blog? Absolutely, lots. Have I gotten paid directly for writing my blog? No. So I think that it requires an adjustment in the way you think about things.
Sure, but that adjustment is still being made in all kinds of areas. You know, how you newspapers are clearly wrestling with it, aren't they? You know.
Yeah.
How is that going to go? I mean, there is a thought that with blogs particularly, and I think the same is true of podcasts, that we're all journalists now, and therefore the formal media
No, I don't think we're all journalists
is
now.
threatened.
No. And I think that, you know, in the conversation we had via email prior to this, the question came about what's Web 3.0. I think that Web 3.0 will be the realization on the part of professional media that we bloggers are not doing what you do. And I think the accurate way to portray, and of course you can't make a generalization. A journalist that writes a blog is a journalist, okay? Right? They haven't changed what they do just because they're writing a blog. But we're more like your sources. We're the people that you used to call up for quotes. And what happened was we have stories to tell too. And those stories were not being told by the media. We would get little sound bites in the middle of articles that would be used to tell the story that you wanted to tell.
Cut like that very neatly.
Pardon me?
Cut like that very neatly and sanitized.
Right, exactly. And strung together as if we're having a conversation one after another, when I might have met the person who spoke before me and the person who spoke after me. So the point is that we wanted to tell our story, so we disintermediated, which is what the internet does. We go, I know you didn't like the jargon, but that's a big word. It means cutting out the intermediary. And
That's okay, that's not jargon.
yeah, it's just something an intelligent person might say, right?
I can do big words.
Right, I know, I feel the same way.
I said marmalade and corrugated quite frequently.
Exactly. So it's not a ban on the number of syllables. And you'll see that happening in virtually everything the internet touches, is that the intermediary, the middleman, comes out. Now, the San Francisco Chronicle, local paper where I live in Berkeley, one of the local papers, just laid off 25% of the staff. And I wrote a piece in March saying that what I'd like to see them do is embrace bloggers. Let's do more of the directness. Bring some of the bloggers into the pages and do very light editing, right? But that's still the same thing. You're still presenting the information came to you from sources.
Isn't it very good news for some newspapers and very bad news for a lot more newspapers?
Maybe.
The New York Times, if everybody's a journalist, when big things happen, you think, who do I turn to? Where do I go for?
I don't think
so
it's-
you go to the New York Times, I think. So for some newspapers, the great explosion of sources on the web is very good news because it means you're a trusted source and that's where people turn. Maybe the BBC, not for me to say. No. But for a lot of newspapers that don't really offer anything special, it's bad news.
I don't trust the New York Times anywhere near as much as I used to.
Okay.
They've betrayed the trust. I think that it matters very much how you've managed the trust.
Let's not argue about the particular
Right,
newspaper,
okay.
but the principle.
No, I think that there would be a place for new brand names to come up in journalism, or old brand names that may not have had much of a sheen to take a shine, just simply by embracing the new medium rather than resisting it. And there's been a lot of resistance amongst the old media. Not so much the BBC. I think the BBC's done very well. I also think the Times, from the technology standpoint, has done very well. I think from the editorial standpoint, they've done terribly. And they may be the last newspaper, it might be inversely proportional to the size and success of the publication. They have the least reason to change right now because they're the richest, right? But the Chronicle has the opportunity to embrace right now the whole thing.
In my formal chunk of the media, I have all kinds of rules. I mean, within the organization about not putting people on the air without their permission. Let's say a whole heap of rules. In your bit of the media, there are no rules.
Well, I think there should be rules in our part of the media. And
how are you going to get them, and what should they be?
Well, I think they should be more or less the same rules. Disclose your conflicts of interest, so we know where you're coming from.
But how
never knowingly say anything that's false.
How can you impose on some blogger?
We have a
who's come
lot
from
of
nowhere?
mechanisms for doing that, a lot of them, and I think we pay more respect to those mechanisms in general than the professional media does, because we get fact-checked instantaneously, and if we're betraying a confidence, we're not disclosing a interest that we have, it's going to get out very quickly. There's a lot of, it's the whole thing in open source, they talk about lots of eyeballs. we've got the eyeballs, and they're watching us very carefully. They're also watching the mainstream media too, but the mainstream media usually ignores what's happening in the blogosphere. So we figure out where the mistakes are very quickly. I'm not that concerned about that. The authority works the same way in our world as it does in yours. If you lie a lot and you mislead a lot, you'll get the reputation for doing that, and people will stop paying attention to you.
What stops me, Joe Blow, who happens to be the son of somebody who's got a big fancy company, just setting up a blog and saying what a marvelous product it is?
Why don't you do it? Go ahead.
Because I'm not Joe Blow.
Okay, well, I'm speaking to one of the Joe Blows out there. Go ahead. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. Why is
without
that a
disclosing the link?
Well, I once had a teacher that said, I'm going to ask you a question, and you have a choice of either answering the truth or not answering or telling me a lie. And I raised my hand. I said, well, what, you mean we can lie? He said, yeah, you can lie if you want, right? You can. The world's full of lies. What we have to do as people who use the news is we have to learn how to sniff them out. And there's nothing new about that, because you're always getting point of view, whether you believe it or not, you're getting point of view in the professional media all the time. And you have to learn how to triangulate. You have to learn how to figure out, okay, this is what somebody from that point of view would say about this. This is what somebody with that point of view would say. And then you try to figure out where the truth actually lies.
Let's move on to Mark. What's Park up to these days?
Well, we were, as I mentioned earlier, we were spun out from Xerox about 5.5 years ago as an independent research center. And what we've been about for that period of time is trying to create a profitable business from our research through the transformational impact it has. And so our business model is around strategic research we do with partners. It's around licensing, patents, and technologies. It's about venturing, incubating and venturing on our own. And it's about doing some selective work with the government.
What are you doing at the moment that you want to talk about that you think in 10 years' time, let's say, we're going to go, wow?
Yeah, I think the way I inferred the question was, what do we see happening in the future? And we reflect what we believe is going to happen based on the internal investments we make in projects that we do for ourselves. We have a joint institute with Scripps right up the road here that has focused on the significant problems in life science, and with Park researchers trying to identify how our competencies can have an impact on those critical problems. And one of the areas that we focused on is cancer. And the area that we've been able to have significant success is in being able to detect tumor cells that are shed into the bloodstream and be able to detect their presence in very, very small concentrations.
So where does that work now go, and what are the possibilities if it goes the way it might go?
Yeah, the impact of the technology, the fundamental technology, is it's not just limited to cancer cells. It can also look at fetal cells and address the need for amniocentesis. It can look at diseased cells and look at a wide range of diseases. Where we're focused right now is being able to use the system for diagnostics to be able to detect cancers for the 4 major tumor groups and get that into the market as a piece of diagnostics equipment. But fundamentally, where we're aiming for is a blood test for cancer, for the presence of cancer in the bloodstream. And that's probably, given how the FDA operates, probably a 5-year proposition, 5 to 7 year proposition.
So that would make the detection much, much earlier, treatably earlier.
Absolutely. That's the point, is that you're able to, at a very early stage, tumors shed cells.
Yeah.
And detecting those in the bloodstream at very low concentrations is an indicator that you have cancer. It's different from genotyping that you may have a predilection for a cancer.
Any idea of, assuming it all pans out, of how early various cancers could be detected and what the rate of success of cure would be at that level?
Well, that's projection. Where we are operating right now is working with doctors who have cancer patients who are metastatic and looking at being able to detect the change in the cell count, the cancer cell count, based on the chemotherapies that they're under, and being able to change those regimens for chemotherapy in real time. And so what we are on the path to is being able to work up the ladder from diagnostics and therapeutics to actual detection.
And what's the funding model for that research? Where's the money come from?
A lot of it has come from our internal investment. We've put probably $8 million into the project over the last 5 years. We have an NIH grant, which is sourcing about $1.5 million a year now, and that runs for another 3 years. So it's both government and internal, and we're talking with partners in both pharma and in healthcare.
And you're doing work on filtering water and ubiquitous computing.
Right, that's another area where we've made our own investment in clean tech about 2 years ago, focused on clean water, which is a fundamental challenge in the world, and also focused on solar energy. And so there are two projects that we're doing there. One is at an early stage using forced spiral flow to be able to filter water. Very simple, very powerful mechanism. The other area we're focused on is photovoltaics, and one of the aspects we're taking is as photovoltaics progress over this year, the years there's been this very shallow improvement in efficiency, and what we're trying to do is have sort of step function increases in that through some of our ejection technologies.
Let me move on to Larry. Tell me what you're up to.
Well, we're in a very different space, the public sector, and our job at Cal IT2 as a part of the University of California is to accelerate the innovation that ultimately drives the wealth creation engine of California and hopefully increases the quality of the citizens of California. So we're now about 1,000 researchers between two buildings, one of which we'll be visiting tonight in San Diego. And we have a very large number of faculty, students, but also companies directly involved, over 100 companies that are engaged one way or the other with us. And we go to take the individual faculty who the University of California has optimized, 20 or 30,000 faculty that are great in what they do. But now what we are looking for is opportunities to team these people together, often who don't know each other, but in this new world have to be cross-disciplinary to attack real problems.
One of the things I'm told you're working on is high-definition video conferencing. It's a contradiction in terms, I put it to you.
Well, we believe that it's inevitable that distance is got to be eliminated for a lot of what we do. There's still a reason to touch the flesh and be in the presence of another physical body. Animals do that, and it's important, I guess. But after after you've sniffed each other and you really want to just get down and get a project done, you need to have much more powerful tools. So we're going to look tonight at what Mark Anderson and I call real broadband, looking at, say, 1,500 megabits a second, over a gigabit per second with the University of Washington, where we're going to have a discussion using multimedia to understand how people can work together. Another area that's the heart of the economy is digital cinema. After 100 years, the film industry is going to switch from putting stuff on silver film to a flow of bits, and that has become a worldwide collaborative effort. So as soon as the bits come out of the camera, they're shooting off to Singapore for special effects, they're going to London and so forth to be added, editing, and so it comes back in the digital dailies the next morning to the director with all of this value added to it. Well, that's fine, except what comes out of one of the projectors you'll see for not high definition, but 4 times high definition. The standard for digital cinema now is 7.6 gigabits a second out of the camera. Okay, that's broadband, not a few megabits to your home, which is the poor excuse we have in this country for broadband. And so you're going to experience that as well.
What difference will that make? I mean, apart from the pictures being better, or are they better even, I wonder?
Well, you can judge for yourself when you see it tonight. Most people say that they've never experienced anything like it, which is essentially that your brain suspends disbelief and you are essentially in the presence of the other person because the imagery is, post-photographic, the people are larger than life, and it's not just the people, but it's sharing now vast data sets that you're working on collaboratively and so forth. For instance, one of the things Craig talked about last night is this vast amount of ocean genomic data. Well, visual computing is one of the things that where Mark talks about as a big trend. We're going to be showing you a bunch of those earthquakes, tornadoes, ocean currents. But if you actually take that notion into the whole genetic world itself, now what happens is, as you'll see, we have over 1,000 users coming into this data bank of the data he collected around the world from over 40 countries. Well, those specialists all want to work with each other, and trying to do that over this thin straw of the shared internet is just very difficult compared to what we could be doing, which is 100 to 1,000 times that bandwidth that allows for real interaction.
The clock's ticking on, but I should ask you, what's public funding of science and technology doing these days?
Well, I think we're at a once in 50-year shift. The post-World War II Bush doctrine, Vannevar Bush, of the endless frontier, where the federal government does it all, is not the way it's going to be anymore. Our country in the United States is going to be fiscally enormously challenged over the next few decades as the chickens come home to roost financially. And it's going to squish the part of the budget that's the so-called discretionary that includes all the federal funding agencies. You're seeing early examples of that. This big metagenomic project that Craig and I are working on, that's funded by the Moore Foundation. That's Gordon Moore's fortune, a little bit of it, one person. Okay? That grant is twice as big as the biggest computer science grant in the country that I also have from the National Science Foundation. So the private foundations are really a major new thing. Stem cells, you see California taking the lead there. Here are states now beginning to have their own science funding project, and why not? California is becoming its own nation state. Its economy is bigger than France, almost as big as UK. It has got to have a science infrastructure appropriate to a country of that scale.
Can the states, though, make good what may or may not come from the federal government? I mean, is that the way forward?
The federal government will continue to be a very important component of all of this, but it will be a component. It won't have a monopoly. And that's where I think you're going to see, we're talking about something like, I don't know, $1 trillion of generational transfer of funds from the wealth generation that went on in the 90s, like we saw 100 years ago, the last time there was something like that. And that's going to be going out through foundations. The Moore Foundation's only 5 years old. The Gates Foundation, a few years beyond that. And now Warren Buffett has put his money into the Gates. It's almost like there's a shakeout going on in the foundation space. That's the future. Now, we hope that the federal government will continue to fund basic research, but I think it's going to become harder and harder as the budgetary reality comes to light, The
clock's against us. Gentlemen, fascinating. It's been a delight. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.